light of the danger or risk endured by the victims, who essentially mistake a lack of abuse from their captors for an act of kindness. The FBI's hostage barricade database system shows that roughly 8% of victims show evidence of Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome can be seen as a form of traumatic bonding, which does not necessarily require a hostage scenario, but which describes strong emotional ties that develop between two persons where one person intermittently harasses, beats, threatens, abuses, or intimidates the other. One commonly used hypothesis to explain the effect of Stockholm Syndrome is based on Freudian theory. It suggests that the bonding is the individual's response to trauma and becoming a victim. Identifying with the aggressor is one way that the ego defends itself. When a victim believes the same values as the aggressor, they cease to be perceived as a threat. Stockholm Syndrome is sometimes erroneously referred to as Helsinki Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome is named after the Norrmalmstorg robbery of Credit Banken at Norrmalmstorg in Stockholm, Sweden. During the crime, several bank employees were held hostage in a bank vault from August 23 to 28, 1973, while their captors negotiated with police. During this standoff, the victims became emotionally attached to their captors, rejected assistance from government officials at one point, and even defended their captors after they were freed from their 6-day ordeal. The term was coined by the criminologist and psychiatrist Nils Bejerot, consultant psychiatrist to the police when it happened. He called it Norrmalmstorg syndrome at Swedish, directly translated as the Norrmalmstorg syndrome, but then later became known abroad as the Stockholm Syndrome. It was originally defined by psychiatrist Frank Åkerberg to aid the management of hostage situations.
See, they're keeping me alive, they're really nice, and in a way, by being nice to our captors, we're increasing the chances that we will live through it. So, oddly enough, it's like our brain's way of helping us get through an abusive or scary and traumatic situation. This applies in a clinical therapy practice more along the lines of people who are in controlling or abusive relationships. For example, we find a lot of battered men or women will refuse to press charges against their spouse or loved one who abused them. Many even bail them out of jail after the police have taken them in because they've abused them. Now let's get into the fascinating part and the reason that Stockholm Syndrome takes hold. There are 4 factors that need to be in place and need to happen, so let's talk about them. The first, and the kind of the obvious one, is that we must feel threatened, either physically or psychologically. And we have to believe that the abuser/captor will actually act out on that threat. The way that we find this happens most commonly is indirectly. Maybe it's breaking things, throwing things around. They may even indirectly talk about harming someone or something that you really care about, like threatening to get rid of a prized possession or to harm an animal that you love and care for. The abuser's goal is actually to get you to just believe that the harm that they could do is possible and it may be imminent. The second condition, and this is where it starts to, you can see how it can psychologically shift for the person being abused, is that the abuser will then show some small kindness. In the instance with Stockholm, in Stockholm, Sweden, and that actual event, the captor said that, well, they fed us and they gave us water and they talked about how hard their life had been as a child. They will do some sort of thing to show you a little kindness, to kind of take care of you a little bit so that you believe they're not all bad. What this does is it gives the abused person hope that the situation could change. This could be a small token like a birthday card or remembering to bring dinner home. It could be any small thing. A lot of abused spouses will say, well, they didn't abuse me when they normally would. So even the absence of abuse with no positive thing added in can feel like a small token of kindness. And you know how I talked about that event in Stockholm, Sweden, how they shared some events about themselves? That's another part of it, and that goes into this number 2, is that they'll share some hard times they've been through or times they've been abused by a mother or father or caretaker. And so it gives them it humanizes them a little bit and makes us feel kind of bad for them. The third condition that needs to take place is being isolated from other perspectives. The way that this can play out in abusive relationships, there are a lot of examples that were given. One of which is, I don't like your friends because they talk bad about me. I don't want you hanging out with them anymore. And if we do, we get abused when we get home. And so in a way, we're slowly being conditioned against seeing our friends. There was an example in a woman who was speaking in one of the forums I was reading where her mother would call just to talk to her and tell her that she was worried about her and the kids. And so because of that, then the husband would find out and he would abuse her more for talking with the mother. So she slowly started telling her mom, please stop calling. You're just causing us trouble. You're ruining our relationship. And so since we're so isolated from any positive person in our life or any person who actually has any insight and is loving and supportive, all we can see is that abuse cycle and that abuse life. Another way this is described is walking on eggshells. We will do everything in our control to make sure that we keep the abuse at bay. That may mean seeing things in our whole life in perspective from the abuser's perspective to make sure everything is just the way they like it, because if it's not, we don't know what's going to happen and we may fear that they will hurt us. The fourth and final condition that must take place is that we actually feel that we are not able to escape. This can be in a lot of fashions, but one of the most common is actually through money. Many abusers will overextend them as a family or as a couple so that if the person who is being abused tries to leave, they actually can't afford anything and they may feel like they'll be out on the street. Another way this can happen is kind of through the emotional abuse avenue, where they will know intimate or embarrassing things about you or even threaten to shame you publicly. There was a woman who was speaking in one of the forums that I'd read saying that her ex-boyfriend had made her do some sexual acts that she wasn't comfortable with, and then when she threatened to leave, he said that he had videotaped it and he was going to release it on Facebook to all of her family and friends. And so that fear and that embarrassment and shame held her captive for another 2 years. This can also play out in a threat of suicide. A lot of the abusers will say to the abused that they will kill themselves if they leave, or they'll threaten homicide. They'll threaten to kill a child or an animal or a parent or someone else that we love if you leave. And so the person who's being abused feels like they really can't because they don't want anything bad to happen to the person because they actually love and care about them or the other people in their lives. I'm sure if you've learned anything about the abuse cycle, you can kind of see how this plays into it and how it's so eerily similar. And the abuse cycle, I'm looking down my notes to make sure I get them just in order, is tension building, incident, reconciliation, and calm. And we go round and round. And so you can see how these certain conditions, as they play into it, can be so similar to the abuse cycle, and that's why people get stuck in it. If you know someone who's in an abusive or controlling relationship, the best things that we can do is just listen and try to be supportive. Don't talk bad about the relationship. Don't get them to leave and try to force them to leave, because that can only build on the shame and embarrassment that they may already feel due to that relationship. And just being there to listen and support them is honestly at times what they need, and encouraging them to get some professional support. You could talk about how maybe you're in therapy and it's really helped you manage some of the things you're going through, and you